democracy in the Middle East. Nor the word in the resolution is ought, which the Random House Dictionary defines as use to express duty or moral obligation. We can conclude that the resolution is asking if it is morally right for the United States to promote democracy in the Middle East. Thus, I value morality. Comiskey, 96. The objective end of moral action is the existence of rational beings. Respect for rational beings requires that in deciding what to do, one must give appropriate practical consideration to the unconditional value of all. The most natural interpretation of the demand that one give equal respect to all leads to a consequentialist normative theory. Consequentialist interpretation simply requires an uncompromising commitment to the equal value and equal claims of all, and a recognition that in moral consideration of conduct, one's own subjective concerns do not have overriding importance. Since everyone's valued equally, prefer utilitarian calculation, because what utilitarian calculation is just choosing the good of a majority over the good of a few. Utilitarian is the most fair and practical way for governments to evaluate action. The standard is maximizing well-being. Democracy promotions effective. Contention: when democracies are less likely to go to war with each other. Tom's 2013. One research supports that countless studies have shown that democratic leaders are responsive to public opinion on matters of foreign policy. Public opinion therefore fosters a special zone of peace among democracies. We find clear evidence that democracy has an independent effect on support for war. Stanford themselves say clearly that democracies are less likely to go to war, and promoting democracy in the Middle East will help combat war. Contention 2. Building a democratic Middle East is necessary to combat terrorism. Current U.S. military is insufficient to combat the larger ideology of ISIS. We need to engender trust for the America and win the hearts and minds of individuals in the Middle East. Chambers 2015. Barack Obama reiterated today that the global battle to defeat ISIS will not be over anytime soon. ISIS is opportunistic and it is nimble. Its fighters embedded themselves in local communities. More than 5,000 bombs of the extremist groups since last August, but military action alone will not wipe out the terrorist groups. Ideologies are not defeated with guns, they're defeated with better ideas, like democracy. Obama also said in every one of the conversations by military advisors that I have had, strong consensus that in order to succeed in the long-term fight against ISIS, we have to develop local forces that can sustain progress. ISIS is simply being stalled by the U.S. military. Obama states clearly that United States military intervention will not be enough to completely destroy ISIS. Local forces are needed as ISIS is an idea. We need to win the hearts and minds of individuals in the Middle East, not just try to overpower them with guns. Democratic principles engender a stronger faith in the government, creates stronger local anti-terrorist force. Part 15. A perfect example of people won over by hearts and minds are the ethnic Kurds. Ethnic Kurds scored their second and third victories over ISIS in the space of 8 days and are by far the most effective force fighting ISIS in both Iraq and Syria. Cut the card right there. It is important to note that the territory of Kurdistan is controlled politically by two main political parties and worked with the U.S. to remove Saddam Hussein from power, one of the few democracies in the Middle East. Contention 3. ISIS uncombated will cause global oil shocks that crush the global economy. Critical 2015. ISIS set fire to the enormous processing plant just over 100 miles north of the capital last week. The problem for the U.S. is the rest of the industrialized world. The Middle East controls 60% of proven oil reserves, and with it the keys of the global economy. Should ISIL capture a major oil field in Iraq, consequences for energy markets and financial system would potentially be catastrophic. The Gulf states, which together account for 2/3 of the cartel's production, are now all affected by the inexorable march of ISIL jihadists, but pure palace defended due to the widening sectarian schism between the Sunni and Shia Muslims across the region in the wake of the Arab Spring's uprising 5 years ago. The biggest threat to the oil price is the political chaos that threatens to engulf the Middle East. Combined, the price of a barrel of oil could skyrocket to levels above $100 per barrel if ISIS allowed to press deeper into Iraq. Cut the card there. So if we don't create a force, if we don't win the hearts and minds of individuals in the Middle East, ISIS could take over oil fields. Even if my opponent brings up like ISIS death counts aren't that high, the issue here is land, and ISIS is getting land quickly. The U.S. military currently is simply stalling them, and if they get control of the land of oil, they will make billions daily. The Middle East has 60% of all the oil in the world, and oil is basically the key to the global economy. Actually, the U.S. dollar is only valuable because of transactions made in oil. It is essentially backed up by oil instead of gold. Sub 1A, oil volatility sparks great power war, forces U.S. intervention, and goes nuclear. King 08, soaring oil prices and market volatility could spark oil war between major powers ignited. Russell of the Naval Postgraduate School addressed the increasing militarization of international energy security. Energy security is deemed central to national security. The possibility that a large-scale war could break out over access to energy resources is one of the most alarming prospects facing the current world system. Growing pool of analysts worry about the readiness to deal with a sustained oil shock. Breakdown in trust for oil markets could spur calls for military intervention. Energy jolt sweep across the smallest and poorest countries. Cut the card there. If the economy does collapse, that will greatly affect many of the nations like Iran and the smaller nations in Iraq, in Africa. So if those nations are destabilized, a lot of them which do have nuclear weapons or have the potential to have nuclear weapons could go to war. When scarcity is the #1 cause for war, it's when, as my card says, if the economy does collapse due to an ISIS takeover, it will lead to a war between many of the major nations, which could lead to extinction. And for those reasons, you should affirm. And I don't support military intervention. AF is advocating for a civil society plan.
We will now begin cross-examination.
Cross-examination. All right.
Rithik, no.
Got it? All right.
I got it.
Okay.
You won't be able to see his face.
So, whenever you're ready. All right. So, basically, within your case, you said that because we need to treat the terrorism problem with like good plans, right? Like good plans, like good democratic plans. Democratic.
What I was saying is that terrorism is not combated by just military intervention, as shown in the past.
All right,
and
so
it
then
doesn't
why
make
isn't it
sense.
working in the status quo? Like we have all these like
We're not-
big democracy
we're
things.
not.
Like we should do this, but then why is it not working?
We're not doing that. That's the problem. We're
Okay.
bombing people. That's the issue here.
All right. So how would the alternative of like using the plans actually solve for that though? Do we have a guarantee that that would work?
So the problem is that the reason ISIS gains like followers and gains money is because they basically people agree with them.
That's
That's the
question.
problem.
Will the alternative work?
Yeah, we present the way to solve this problem.
But do you have assurance that it would work though? That's the question.
There is no assurance for any policy ever.
Okay.
There is no assurance ever. You just
So-
make a policy
so we can just
over
assume that the
rational
probability that
decision
it solves would be
making.
pretty well, right?
No, why would we assume that since I just read a full case of why it's good to do that?
All right, cool. So, and then your first contender is democracy promote. Democracies like are naturally not going to go to war, right?
Yes.
So why is this the case?
I mean, what it says is that, the card says is that democratic leaders are more responsive to public opinion on matters of foreign policy.
All right. So what happens if the public wants to go to war?
Well, if most of the public wants to go to war, there probably is a really like compelling reason to go to war.
All right. So then
It's
it doesn't
much-
prevent war then.
No, it's like, so if there's one person that wants to go to a war, in a non-democratic state, if one person wants to go to a war, that means war. That's what it is. But in a democracy, then the majority has to agree to
But
go
if
to
the
war.
majority wants
And-
it,
and
like it has like within the
the
United States,
empirical,
Okay.
okay, so
It has
empirical
within the United
evidence
States,
shows
yeah.
over the past that democracies go to war much less often. That is what Stanford is saying in this card.
so just because they just go to war less often, but they still go to war.
Much less often.
Okay, fine, that's good. So basically, and then in the very last card, you say oil shocks will destroy like all this stuff, and so
Like
doesn't
stuff
the
in
app
the
solve for
economy?
terrorism? Well, yeah, it will like all these different. It'll cause all these different problems, right?
Yeah.
So how does the app solve for this?
The F, like the entirety, like what almost all my case
Tell
is
me how
saying
it
is that
I just want to know, man.
we promote democracy.
Wanna
We
know.
win, like the king is like we win their hearts and minds. We have to win the support of the people in the
All
Middle
right,
East.
but what happens if they don't want us like for support?
What do you mean?
Like say like our ideals like infringe on them. If I read a card that says, "Oh, Muslim people don't want the democracy because like infringes on the religious rights," would that like be direct counter to the neg?
That if it infringes on the religious rights, we're
Yeah.
not forcing it on them. We're just promoting it.
But in order to promote, does that mean we have to change them though?
We can just introduce the idea. Like I'm open to idea. Like if someone tells me an idea and I find it
But
really
there
great,
isn't
I'll
there a
adopt it.
resolution to promote democracy, not to
Yeah.
just give them the idea?
Promoting by giving them the idea. That's like how it promotes.
All right. So, but there's no
Uh,
assurance that it would actually. Okay,
Cross six is over.
All right.
Oh,
I
you
can
wanna
take
throw-
questions during prep too.
Okay.
All right. But like you can still say that during
So like specifically, I'm talking about funding pro-democracy and pro-human civil rights society groups, and increase access to media, internet, libraries, and create forums.
All right, that's good.
I can read solvency evidence if you want.
Yeah, you can go ahead and read that when you're ready.
I'm not worried about it. And if you plan on attending both days, spectator or not, you're fine. You don't have to do anything. But
Trying to go fast, guys. Sorry.
You're reading Orientals.
Maybe. Okay, I'm done.
In here, that one's.
I thought you were timing me. Just stay at least like a minute 30. Okay. Hello, friends. How are you guys? You guys ready for me to read?
No.
Just go.
Yeah.
I am going. Jeez. Alright, so is the opponent ready?
Yeah.
Okay, is everyone else in the crowd ready? All right. Democratization is intended to incorporate countries in the capitalist system, turning them into profit-making tools for the U.S. Fisher 13. Democracy promotion comprises a series of initiatives to promote economic change in independent countries. The democracy promoted by these organizations is a system in which elections are carefully managed by competing elites. Such limited democracy have proved very successful in suppressing autonomous popular politics. As market dominance intensifies, it widens the gulf between the rich and the poor. The United States is using ideological justifications as a rhetorical device to mold political change in its targeted countries. Capitalism is the root cause of racism. Taylor O2. Racism originated with capitalism. History proves this. Prior to capitalism, racism did not exist. Greek and Roman societies had no concept of racial oppression. These societies were built on the back of slaves. However, because slavery in ancient Greek and Rome was not racially based, these societies had no corresponding ideology of racial inferiority or oppression. Egyptian, Greek, Roman societies had a favorable image of blacks. If racism existed prior to the slave trades, then Africans would have been the first group of people to be enslaved. But in the early years of colonial America, there was a surprising equality between blacks and whites. Cut the card there. Racism inevitably leads to genocide. Shooting Wills 08. All cultures have categories to distinguish between us and them, between members of our groups and others. Classifications and civilizations are widespread human practices that are part of national identity and cultural self-awareness. When joined with dehumanization, these qualities move a society towards genocide. Dehumanization regulates the classified group to a subcategory of subhumanity, making it easier to overcome aversion to killing. Once moderate voices have been suppressed, individual deaths will escalate into mass killings. And weighing between impacts, genocide is fundamentally the worst type of oppression. We have an a priori obligation to reject things that with the potential to cause genocide. The alternative is to reject the thought of neoliberal ideology and is sufficient to solve for capitalism. It derives its strength from the value we attribute to it. Individual rejection is key. Johnson 04. To cure intellectual constipation resulting from capitalist ideology, seeing through the ideological fantasies by learning how to think again outside the confines of the current restrictions as real revolution. The value of currency is reducible to the value attributed to it. Derailing capitalism by destroying its essential financial substance is as easy as dissolving the substance's powers. Faced with the choice between living the capitalist lie, many individuals decide to accept the pseudo reality and deceptively comforting fiction. Prefer pre-fiat impacts. They examine the underlying representations of our advocacies because fiat is illusory. There's no magic wand that passes legislation when you sign the ballot, but your ballot can have a real impact on how we think about the world. And the role of the judge is to reward the debater whose performance and discourse does not perpetuate the oppression of the people. We must question what our discourse and round justifies. Vincent 13. We as a community, we must reconceptualize the role of the speech in the Speech Act. It is no longer enough for judges to vote off the flow anymore. Students are being held to a higher threshold to better articulate why racism is bad, which is a problem in this space we deem to be educational. Debaters must be held accountable for the words they say and round. We should no longer evaluate the speech. Instead, begin to evaluate the Speech Act. Cut the cards there. And now, onto my opponent's case. So his value criteria, and I completely agree that we must value morality as a good thing, but prefer the role of the judge because the role of the judge is on a higher level than that of the round. So when you're evaluating the round, you first look at my role of the ballot before his value criterion. And then second, his value of maximizing well-being would be better served on the neg because, like I'm showing you, capitalism will cause racism. Racism leads to genocide. I already told you that genocide is bad because, like, we have this fundamental obligation knowing that genocide and all the things associated with genocide is a bad thing. So right now we're going to be causing more harm to the people. So it's going to be infringing on the idea of people's maximizing well-being. So there you should just be voting neg anyway. And then now onto my opponent's contention. The first one is democratic peace theory, but more empirical evidence disproves democratic peace theory. Now it's 8. There is a clear, sharp difference between the use of international violence among democracies. When examining the involvement in militarized inter-states disputes among the continuously democratic states between the years of 1950 and 2001, an interesting finding emerges. Of the 283 discrete involvements by these stable democracies, just 4 countries carried out 75.6% of these. Israel, the United States, India, and the United Kingdom. These 4 states accounted for 214 militarized interstate disputes over the period of observation. So here you can see that democracies actually will go to war with each other. It's not like just because they're democracies, they're not going to be fighting wars anymore. They're going to be still fighting wars. So it doesn't matter which way you look at the round. I'm already showing you that genocide is fundamentally worse than any sort of war. And then now going on to his third contention of oil shocks. Well, there is no impact my opponent can take from this. U.S. and Europe have strategic reserves checks. To avoid the expected oil crisis due to the shut-off of Iranian oil, the American administration is planning to use strategic petroleum reserve that has a supply of oil equals to 175 days worth of Iranian production. Europe will also use its own strategic oil reserve. These reservations would be replenished with fresh oil after controlling Kazakhstan. And here I'm showing you why he has no link into any of the war things he's talking about. And then also, if you even buy that argument, high oil prices will cause a transition to alternative energy, which will be better in the long run. Rivlin 1. For the U.S. and other Western countries to reduce oil consumption, high oil prices will do this automatically if they are maintained. They will encourage the use of alternative fuels and technologies that will use less fuel. Stimulating this would reduce exposure to oil prices and shortages, and would encourage the development of new technologies. This would stimulate economic growth. So right now, even if you buy the argument that, we're going to rising oil prices because of ISIS, this will A, be turning a better economic growth, and B, will causing more use of alternative energy, which would be solving the problems that are attributed to the environment due to global warming. And he has no impact he can link out of the oil crisis, because I'm showing you that the U.S. and Europe will have ways to overcome any crisis averted when it comes to oil. And then finally, on the card about terrorism, prefer my cards because prefer my impact of genocide because A, it's a bigger probability. I'm showing you here that democratization will inherently cause genocides to happen. Genocide, in any sort of society where racism is such a prevalent thing, there's so much segregation towards those people and mass killings. Think of the United States, for example. Within the United States in the early times, blacks were segregated against, and it was a very harmful thing, and they were being lynched for doing basically nothing. If they gave a woman assumed bad look, they would be lynched and killed. Doesn't that constitute genocide because you're killing someone based on their race? I mean, if a white person did that, were they lynched? No, that did not happen. It's just in any society this will happen. And I'm showing you that capitalism was the root cause of this. So if we can solve the idea of capitalism through rejecting the ideology sufficient to it, we can solve genocide and in turn maybe even create peace among all. And isn't that fundamentally what it means to be human? To be able to promote peace to every single person? And that is why in today's debate you must vote neg, because I am solving all the harms today.
Say thank you.
Now we can round 2. Just real quick, does anybody have any questions?
Any questions?
Procedural questions, terminology?
Or do you want me to clarify my case or Shlok's case before we start?
Okay, carry on with the cross-examination.
All right, so your case is saying that capitalism causes racism and racism causes genocide, right?
Yeah.
So in your card, don't you, all right, never mind. But isn't ISIS themselves prejudiced and racist?
Yeah.
So isn't combating ISIS fulfilling the neg?
Well, I mean, if you can show that ISIS will be completely terminated by doing the app, then I can say you can say that you're causing genocide. But I mean, if there's any small reminiscence of the ISIS
so
or
do you read
Taliban
any-
within these Middle East countries,
Okay, so
because ISIS isn't
Rithik,
the only
it's my
terrorist
CX.
group there.
Do you read any solvency dissents? Do you read anything that says I don't have solvency?
Oh, I mean, I read the card that says that oil doesn't lead to.
All right, so but you don't read solvency evidence, right? You don't say that it's improbable that the app will work.
I mean, we can assume that because
Okay, so
that.
you didn't say it.
I just said no.
Okay.
didn't know that.
No, that's not how it works. But all right.
I mean, couldn't know that.
So you said that peace theory is false. What's your source?
Niles Lee 8, who's a professor of international studies at the Southern Politics State University.
Southern
and,
Politics State University.
Polytechnic. Yeah. So he's a professor. Pretty cool guy. I mean, he wrote literally a book about why some
All right,
democracies
so
like wars. So
you
he's
said
probably kind of
you said in
credible
your
on
oil shot stuff, you said that they have reserves for 175 days. So are you assuming that we are going to switch completely to renewable energy within 175 days, a third of a year?
You're misunderstanding what the two. Those are two different pieces of evidence. The first
Yeah,
evidence, the
no, but
underlying
hold
evidence
up,
of
hold up. You're saying, no, what your card is saying is like, oh, we have reserves for 175 days, and then after that we can develop, and that's like,
No, shut up.
we have
Let-
reserves for
let me explain the
175
cards,
days.
okay? So the first card, the Alka card, says that we have supplies up to 175 days, so that
But
we can
175
solve the
days.
whatever's problem that's going on
Right,
within
but
like
do you think
Kazakhstan
we can,
and that's
do you
like
think we
not
can
taken.
solve the reliance on oil? Do you think we can switch
Well,
to
you have two
renewable
different
energy in
you have two
175
different
days?
impacts there, Shlok. You had like your high oil prices resolving
So
from
we're
the
gonna solve-
ISIS, and then I also
You're
have
saying
like
we're going
them
to solve
taking over the
ISIS in 175 days, a third of a year. Is that what you're
Well, we
claiming?
could possibly do that. I mean, it's
Okay,
like, not
possibly. Do you think it's likely, considering we haven't done it over the course of 10 years?
Well, I mean, if they're controlling the oil supply, that could like basically destroy the world. I mean, we might be able to like unite together with like all the European powers to just go and blow up ISIS. I mean, we could possibly do that.
okay.
I mean, that's a probability. Like, if
So you're
if
you're
the-
supporting
everyone in the
genocide,
world
is what you're saying. You're
I'm not
supporting
I'm
genocide.
supporting helping the people. And right now, okay, so think about how oil impacts our economy.
By
Everyone
blowing
knows
them
that,
up is how you're
everyone
helping
knows that oil is an essential part of our economy. If the economy declines, that can cause a lot of bad things.
That's what
so
I'm
we
saying.
have an obligation to solve it. And I'm saying that the U.S.
By
can
blowing
ban
them up,
without
by
a-
genocide.
We're not blowing them up.
That's what you just said,
We're not causing.
Isn't that what you just said? By blowing them up or something. End quote.
We could,
Alright,
that was one
class
strategy.
sex
We
is
could
over.
put them in jail too. We don't have to.
Hey, Rithik, you were doing good until that point.
Honestly.
He was misstating something I said, so I
You
like.
can't say anything.
You can address it in your next speech.
All right, I'll do
Hey,
that.
Rithik, at least your case was good.
What?
At least
Your case was good, Rithik, but then the cross-sex.
No, he's not done yet. We got.
Hair spotted.
Really, really good case. You like read his mind. But your Buddhism case is better.
I wrote a piece now.
It's the best case
I should have
ever.
read that. This is like, we should cause genocide.
Oh, not yes.
That would be-
Enhanced.
We could cause
I'm
genocide.
gonna read that
Real
first
quick,
time.
real quick. What's your
Isn't that your inlet presentation?
What?
Yeah, it is. It is.
All those and I was
It's the
like,
best case ever.
this is America. People are gonna be like,
Rithik.
Like, is the Buddhism case on Google Docs? You should read it out loud.
From the
you can't reject the ideology of well, the thing said initiatives to the link card said that it's initiatives to promote democracy. Any initiative to promote democracy is inherently funded by capitalism. So that means the entire app is capitalist. I mean, is fueled by capitalist incentives.
Going on here.
No, he's asking questions, but
yeah,
and so the alt you can't do the alt at the same time because like if you're promoting a capitalism, you can't reject capitalism at the same time. It's just not possible.
Good case, though, Rithik. You read his mind.
What?
Good case, you read his mind.
You're not really supposed to do that.
Oh my god.
No, it's because like you both. If you're gonna try to make like a ground argument on me, you have grounded interests. You can't make that argument.
Yeah, that's not
Yeah,
what
you
I'm
have
trying to
already.
do.
You have a grounded oppression. That's basically it. So, yeah. I mean, if you want to see the card, you can see the card.
I have a minute 30 left.
Good case, Rithik. It was the best case ever.
First turn.
Do that. You can't run theory. This is a
Yeah,
theory.
so I was already here.
I still think the Buddhism case is better, though. That-
It is better.
The Buddhism idea itself for your value criterion is a genius idea.
Sure it'll go well.
Alright,
Alright. Are you guys ready?